Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty unique, a workshop that teaches a method for spiritual intervention they call deliverance. We're going to look at how they take ancient biblical stories and turn them into a very practical, step-by-step playbook.
All right, so let's start with a story you've probably heard of, even if you're not super familiar with the Bible. It's the story of the man called Legion. For this group, this isn't just a story. It's the foundational case study, the ground zero for their entire framework.
So where are we getting all this from? Well, our source material comes straight from a workshop where people are taught how to break down these ancient stories. And get this, they don't just treat them like scripture. They treat them like case files for what they call deliverance ministry.
Okay, before we go any further, we gotta be on the same page with the terminology. What exactly is deliverance? For this group, it's pretty specific. It's the practice of expelling what they believe are external demonic influences from a person.
So, how do they do it? How do they turn these stories into a manual? Well, they use this really consistent four-step framework for every single case. Think of it like their roadmap. It's how they pull practical, actionable lessons from each story, and they just apply it over and over again to build their playbook.
All right, let's put this framework into action. We're going to apply it to their first big case study, the man from the tombs, the one possessed by that spirit called Legion.
Okay, step one, establish the context. The group really zeroes in on the man's condition before the encounter. I mean, think about it. He's totally isolated, his behavior is out of control, he's hurting himself. For them, these aren't just psychological symptoms. They're clear signs of a severe spiritual problem.
And that brings us to step 2, which is all about the transformation. This is where they do a before and after comparison, and it's a stark contrast, right? They look at the impact of the deliverance by showing this total 180, from a tormented outcast to a peaceful advocate for his faith.
Now for step 3. This is where it gets really specific. The workshop participants actually brainstorm all the different types of spirits they think were manifesting. So they look at his actions, living in tombs, the self-harm, the isolation, and from that they create a list, like a diagnostic chart, to categorize all the spiritual forces they believe are at work here.
Okay, this is a really interesting point they make. Remember the storm that happened right before Jesus got to the shore? Well, in the workshop, they don't see that as just a random weather event. Nope. They interpret it as the spirit Legion literally trying to defend its territory, putting up what they call territorial resistance before Jesus even arrived.
So the Legion case study is all about direct, raw spiritual authority. But their second case study, this one introduces a completely new and frankly crucial variable into the mix, the role of human faith. So again, they start with that before and after comparison. But check this out. A really key detail in the before column is that the disciples, they couldn't help. They tried and they failed. And that failure becomes a massive learning moment in their analysis.
And when it's time to identify the manifesting spirits, you'll see some overlap with the first case, things like suicide and death. But they also add new ones that are tied directly to the boy's specific symptoms, like a spirit of infirmity that they connect to his seizures.
So what's the big lesson they pull from the disciples' failure? It's huge. It's that not all spirits are created equal. They look at this verse and see it as clear evidence that certain kinds of spirits require a whole other level of spiritual preparation, specifically prayer and fasting, if you're going to confront them successfully. Okay, so after they've broken down these case studies piece by piece, what do? Well, the workshop participants start pulling out these big overarching principles. This is the moment they shift from just analyzing stories to actually building their playbook for deliverance, turning theory into practice.
So, what are the key takeaways from all this? This last part is where we put it all together. We're going to see how the analysis gets synthesized into a really practical set of rules and beliefs for their ministry.
First off, they make a really critical distinction. They separate an external spirit from something they call a stronghold. Now, what's a stronghold? They define it as an internal, wrong pattern of thinking. And the implication of that is massive. It means the solution is different. It's not about casting something out. It's about the person renewing their own mind. So responsibility shifts a bit here.
And here they are, the core principles that make up their playbook. Every single one of these is pulled directly from their analysis of the stories. You've got the power of faith, which they took from the story of the boy's father. The need for prayer and fasting, that came from the disciples' failure. It's a whole system built on this idea that spiritual authority is real, but you have to use it with wisdom, preparation, and a lot of discernment. And when you put the two case studies side by side, it becomes crystal clear how they pull out these different lessons, right? With Legion, it was all about direct authority. But with the boy, the father's faith was a necessary ingredient. The resistance in the first story was external, that storm. In the second, it was internal, the disciples' own unbelief.
And there's one last absolutely crucial piece of their playbook, a warning. Deliverance isn't a one-and-done deal. They point to this verse to argue that once that spiritual house is empty, you have to actively fill it with good things. If you don't, they believe even worse spirits can come back. So, the follow-up, the maintenance, is just as important as the main event.
So what we've just walked through is a window into one group's highly structured system for spiritual intervention. And it really leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? How does a framework that sees personal struggles through the lens of spiritual warfare ultimately shape a person's approach to healing and to their own personal responsibility?